Hunter's Ridge was a picture-perfect suburb just outside a bustling city, known for its manicured lawns, uniform mailboxes, and rows of pastel-colored houses that looked as though they'd been plucked from a real estate brochure. The community boasted well-kept sidewalks, cheerful garden beds, and tree-lined streets that turned golden in autumn. Everything seemed precise and orderly, largely thanks to the local homeowners association, HOA, which enforced strict rules about paint colors, front yard decorations, and holiday lights. Among the tidy houses stood the home of Travis and Melanie Pierce, parents to 6-year-old Evan. Evan had been diagnosed on the autism spectrum at the age of 3. Though a bright and curious boy, he sometimes struggled with overstimulation and found comfort in repetitive, soothing activities. One of his favorite therapies involved gentle swinging, a repetitive motion that calmed his nerves and helped him regulate intense sensory input. Travis and Melanie had recently secured permission, or so they thought, to install a small therapy swing in their backyard. It wasn't elaborate, just a sturdy A-frame with a cloth seat that hugged Evan's body, helping him feel secure. The seat was bright blue, with enough straps and padding to provide the gentle pressure Evan craved. On most afternoons, when the weather allowed, Melanie would sit outside with him, reading a book while Evan swayed happily in his beloved swing. For a brief time, life in Hunter's Ridge felt idyllic. Neighbors waved hello, flower beds burst with color, and the birdsong mingled with the faint squeak of Evan's swing. But beneath the veneer of suburban calm lurked a potent force. Maxine Rogers, a middle-aged woman on the HOA board, often dubbed Karen by exasperated residents due to her bossy, intrusive personality. Like many who earned that moniker, Maxine seemed unable to let anyone deviate from her personal standard of what was acceptable. Evan's swing soon caught her eye. Maxine believed it spoiled the aesthetics of Hunter's Ridge, too large, too bright, and, worst of all, in her mind, too unusual. It did not fit the standard patio sets or discreet children's play equipment typically hidden behind fences. Though the Pierce family's yard was fenced, portions were visible from the street. From Maxine's perspective, that garish blue swing stuck out like a sore thumb. In those early days, she merely mentioned it in passing at HOA gatherings. "We must ensure all yard installations align with property guidelines," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. But no one else seemed particularly bothered, especially not after Melanie explained that it was a therapy device for their autistic son. Neighbors generally reacted with understanding, even sympathy. Some admired the Pierces for giving Evan a safe place to decompress. But Maxine, ironically known as Karen among those who had clashed with her before, stewed in silent disapproval. She was used to controlling every detail of the neighborhood's appearance. The notion of a large, cloth therapy swing, visible from certain angles above the fence, irritated her sense of uniformity. And so, the seeds of conflict were sown, ready to sprout the moment she could concoct a reason to remove the swing from the Pierce's yard. Maxine Rogers, whom we'll refer to as Karen for simplicity, though she despised that nickname, had moved to Hunter's Ridge a few years ago after her second divorce. Armed with a background in property management, she quickly joined the HOA board, finding validation in enforcing rules. She was a fit woman in her late 50s, typically dressed in crisp pastel blouses and pressed slacks, hair coiffed to perfection. With a clipboard in hand, she made rounds of the neighborhood weekly, checking for unapproved color schemes or slightly overgrown hedges. Her usual mode of operation was to send official-sounding warnings on HOA letterhead, referencing regulations about lawn height or garage door hues. Residents whispered about how she once fined a homeowner for installing a non-regulation front lamp, a mere half-inch taller than permitted. She approached every situation with a self-righteous zeal, believing the rules were paramount to maintain property values and keep the neighborhood classy. Despite the quiet acceptance of the therapy swing by other board members, Karen seethed. She believed the Pierces should have submitted a formal proposal for permanent structures, complete with color samples and a construction timeline. The fact that the family likely had a note from a therapist didn't matter to her. She was convinced that the presence of that large, bright swing would incite others to erect similarly unsightly structures. One chilly spring evening, Karen cornered the HOA president, Barb Mitchell, after a meeting about landscaping budgets. "Barb," she said, lip curling, that family with the swing, did we ever formally approve it? Because I never saw the paperwork. Barb sighed, accustomed to Karen's persnicketyness. They have a note from their occupational therapist. It's more of an adaptive device than a permanent fixture. The board decided not to hassle them. Karen's eyes narrowed. But it's an eyesore, and it's visible above the fence line. That violates at least 2 clauses in our guidelines about uniformity. Barb shrugged politely. Karen, let's show some compassion. It's for a special needs child. The dismissive tone only fueled Karen's indignation. She left with her clipboard in hand, scowling at the memory of the bright swing draped over a metal frame in the Pierce's yard. Compassion, in her mind, was less important than upholding the standards that made Hunter's Ridge so perfect. Over the next few weeks, her frustration festered. She would watch from her kitchen window as Evan played in the swing, the seat occasionally peeking above the fence line as he moved. It became a daily reminder of rules being broken in her eyes. Quiet hostility, left to brew, often results in explosive actions. For Karen, the final push came from an encounter that convinced her it was time to remove the swing, by any means necessary. Unaware of Karen's growing obsession, the Pierces continued their usual routine. Evan's occupational therapist, Mary Ann, praised the family's dedication in providing a safe space that encouraged sensory integration. The gentle swaying helped Evan calm his racing thoughts, reduce meltdowns, and even improved his sleep. Sometimes, Travis would hang small puzzle pieces from the top bar so Evan could grab them while swinging, turning it into a game of skill. Other times, Melanie would play soft music on a portable speaker, letting Evan match his movements to the rhythm. Neighbors occasionally glimpsed the child giggling in his bright blue seat, arms outstretched as though he were flying. On a crisp Saturday morning, the Pierces hosted a backyard barbecue for a few friends and neighbors, including a couple whose child was also on the autism spectrum. While the adults chatted by a modest grill, the children took turns on the swing. Laughter and friendly conversation drifted over the fence line. To nearly everyone, it was a heartwarming scene, except one. From her window, Karen stared, lips pursed in disapproval. More children, more use of that unapproved contraption. She jotted a note in her ledger. Illegal gatherings? Excess noise after 8 p.m.? Possibly. She'd find something to hold against them. Evan's father, Travis, had a fleeting sense that someone was watching. Catching a glimpse of movement behind Karen's curtains, he frowned, but then shook it off. He refused to let paranoia spoil the moment. Later that evening, after guests left, Melanie found a small slip of paper stuffed under the fence gate, scrawled with the message, "This bright monstrosity must go. You're violating neighborhood guidelines." There was no signature, but the bold, slanted handwriting reminded them of notes from Karen's prior warnings. Melanie's heart sank. She and Travis had half expected a complaint. But who would stoop to leaving an anonymous note instead of speaking with them? They glanced at each other, suspecting Karen. Determined not to let a single note rattle them, they resolved to check with the HOA's official stance. So far, no formal letter had arrived. Perhaps it was just one neighbor's personal gripe. But they underestimated how far Karen was willing to go. The note was just the start of a more brazen plan. The next week passed without incident, until one drizzly Tuesday afternoon. Travis came home early to discover something jarring. The therapy swing was gone. The A-frame still stood, but the bright blue seat, straps, padding, everything, had vanished. Confused, he assumed Melanie might have brought it inside. But stepping into the living room, he found her frantically checking closets and rummaging through the garage. "Did you take it down?" Travis asked, voice tight with worry. "No," Melanie breathed. "It was out there last night. I used it with Evan before dinner. He had a meltdown, and the swing calmed him. Then I went inside to do laundry. Are you sure it's not just unhooked and somewhere in the yard?" They searched every corner. No sign of the seat. A dread-filled suspicion crept in. Someone had stolen it. Who would do such a thing? It wasn't a typical item one would steal for resale, nor was it easy to hide. Yet the frame was untouched, meaning whoever took it was specifically targeting the therapy seat. Anxiously, Melanie checked the backyard gate. The latch was slightly ajar, a potential clue. The fence wasn't tall enough to deter a determined person, especially if they could open the gate. Her mind flashed to the anonymous note, to Karen's watchful eyes. But would she truly steal a therapy device from a child? Evan arrived home from school shortly after. When he realized his swing was gone, he let out a distressed moan, pacing around the yard searching for it. Travis and Melanie tried to calm him, but heartbreak etched itself onto their faces. The swing was more than a toy. It was a key to Evan's emotional well-being. Losing it felt catastrophic. They called the police, who arrived and took a statement, though they couldn't promise much. The stolen item was unusual, with little street value, so it wasn't likely to turn up in pawn shops or typical theft rings. The officers suggested checking with neighbors or installing a security camera. Desperate for answers, the Pierces knocked on the doors of nearby homes. Most expressed shock and sympathy. But when they reached Karen's door, she stood behind her chain lock, face impassive. "Haven't seen it," she said, voice clipped. "Maybe you should keep better track of your possessions." Then she shut the door. The abruptness stung, reaffirming their suspicions she might be involved. But with no proof, they were stuck. That night, Evan had a meltdown, sobbing inconsolably over the missing swing. He kept repeating, "Where's my chair? Where's my seat?" Travis and Melanie hugged him tightly, cursing the cruelty of whoever took it. Deep down, they were convinced Karen was behind it. Yet how could they prove it? And how would they replace an expensive therapy device on short notice? The next morning, the Pierces posted about the theft in the Hunters Ridge community's online forum. Residents responded with an outpouring of concern and support, offering to help search the neighborhood. A few neighbors recalled seeing a suspicious figure near the Pierce yard, but none could identify them clearly. Only that it seemed to be a woman with a hooded jacket. Some had better guess. Could it be that HOA lady? One wrote. She's always complaining about eyesores. This is horrifying if she stooped to theft. Karen, meanwhile, lurked in the forum without commenting. She read the outraged posts with a blend of triumph and mild apprehension. The swing was safe in her backyard shed, concealed behind old gardening tools. In a moment of impulsiveness, she had decided to take it, telling herself she was removing an unapproved structure. To her, it wasn't theft, but enforcement. The sinking feeling in her gut told her she'd gone too far, yet she doubled down, convinced the Pierces would thank her later for abiding by the rules. Or so she rationalized. Evan's meltdown extended into the next day. Without his swing, he was restless, easily agitated, struggling to focus on even small tasks. Melanie missed work to stay home, uncertain how to console him. She tried distracting him with favorite puzzles, music, and comfort items, but nothing replicated the soothing motion of the swing. Travis, furious, considered confronting Karen directly, but Melanie urged caution, accusing her with no proof might escalate the conflict. In quiet desperation, Travis phoned their occupational therapist, Mary Ann, explaining the situation. She offered suggestions for alternative therapy tools, like a compression vest or a rocking chair, but those were half measures. The Pierces' financial situation was tight, and ordering a new specialized swing wasn't cheap or immediate. "We'll figure something out," Melanie reassured her son, though fear tightened her chest. If the swing was truly gone for good, how would they manage Evan's nightly meltdowns? The neighborhood's mood shifted. People walked more cautiously past Karen's house, recalling prior run-ins. Some whispered that they'd seen her rummaging in her shed at odd hours. Others posted in the forum, demanding the HOA confirm whether the therapy seat was unapproved. The HOA president, Barb, repeated that it was allowed, especially with a doctor's note. But no official letter condemning the theft came out. Residents suspected Karen's manipulative influence behind the scenes. Tension crackled like static in the otherwise pristine cul-de-sac. Outrage at the disappearance of Evan's therapy swing spread beyond the Pierces' immediate circle. Carlos and Regina Morales, who lived 2 houses down, had a nephew on the autism spectrum and understood the importance of sensory devices. They organized a small neighborhood meeting in their garage, inviting the Pierces and any neighbors willing to help. Over a dozen showed up, including some who had never socialized much but were moved by the cruelty of stealing a child's therapy item. The group brainstormed possible solutions. One idea was to search every garage or shed in the neighborhood, but that would require permission or a warrant, which wasn't practical. Another was to raise funds for a replacement swing, but they soon realized that simply replacing the seat might not be enough if it could be stolen again. Then Megan Liu, a mother of 2 energetic boys, proposed a bolder concept. What if we help them build a bigger, better therapy zone in their backyard? something Karen can't easily snatch or sabotage. We can pool materials, add stronger locks, maybe even cameras. The mention of a bigger, better therapy zone lit a spark. Others chimed in with ideas. A more robust swing set, plush floor mats, a mini climbing wall, or a small trampoline. They envisioned a safe haven for Evan to meet multiple sensory needs, not just swinging. Travis and Melanie were stunned but touched by the generosity. They hesitated, worried about finances. But neighbors insisted on donating leftover wood, paint, even labor. One father, an amateur carpenter, offered to design a custom A-frame with built-in anchor points. Another neighbor had a spool of thick rope that could support a new swing seat. Regina Morales volunteered to help gather old yoga mats, foam tiles, and other soft materials to create a landing zone under the swing. The main hurdle was the HOA's approval. Typically, installing large backyard structures involved a lengthy process. But the neighbors believed the board would show leniency, especially after the negative publicity around the stolen therapy device. "We'll draft a plan, get signatures, and present it at the next HOA meeting," Carlos declared. The group agreed wholeheartedly. Within an hour, they had a rough blueprint for Evan's sensory corner, envisioning a space that included not only a sturdier swing, but also additional features that an occupational therapist might recommend. A vertical panel for chalk drawing, a small climbing ramp, and accessible safety steps. It would be locked from the inside of the Pierce home's fence, making it nearly impossible for random intruders or malicious neighbors to tamper with. When Travis and Melanie expressed overwhelmed gratitude, the neighbors responded that it was the least they could do. Everyone recognized that a therapy device for a child with special needs shouldn't be at risk of theft or sabotage. They aimed not only to restore what was lost, but to surpass it, delivering a backyard retreat that truly nurtured Evan's development. While the neighbors mobilized, Karen grew uneasy. She hadn't anticipated such a public uproar. In her mind, removing the swing was a rightful measure, but now she watched rumors swirl about a major backyard renovation. If the Pierces installed an even bigger structure, that would be a direct affront to her sense of order. She considered returning the stolen seat, maybe tossing it somewhere surreptitiously, but her pride prevented it. Admitting she'd taken it felt unthinkable. Instead, she tried a new tactic, circulating complaints about excessive building in backyards and potential safety hazards. She drafted an email to the HOA board, warning them that a large, improvised construction project was planned, which might violate zoning rules or the community's aesthetic guidelines. She even included references to possible lawsuits if a child got hurt, hoping fear would deter the board from granting approval. But the board's stance was softening. Over half its members had either read outraged comments in the forum or heard from the neighbors how important the therapy corner was. Even the president, Barb, felt disgusted by the theft. She recognized that blocking the new structure would look heartless. "Sure, we'll require basic safety standards, but they deserve a chance to present the plan," Barb told Karen in a curt reply. Karen seethed. She recognized that the tide of public opinion was strongly favoring the Pierces. Frantic, she escalated her smear campaign. She posted anonymous flyers around the neighborhood that read, "Are you aware that a large playground is being built next door? Noise, clutter, property devaluation. Is that what you want in Hunter's Ridge?" The flyers lacked official HOA headers, though, and neighbors quickly tore them down. Unwilling to surrender, Karen vowed to show up at the upcoming HOA meeting and do everything in her power to block the sensory corner. She reread the community bylaws, searching for any clause that might ban a multi-feature backyard therapy setup. Little did she know, the neighbors were preparing thoroughly for that exact confrontation, eager to see justice done for Evan and his stolen swing. The volunteer group grew. Through the neighborhood's forum, word spread that the Pierces were in dire need of a robust therapy setup. People posted lists of items they could donate: spare lumber, foam squares, heavy-duty hardware. A local welder offered to craft stable brackets for the swing. Even the local hardware store manager, upon hearing the story, contributed a discount on any building supplies the group purchased. Under the guidance of an occupational therapist, Mary Ann, who decided to get more involved, they refined the blueprint. Mary Ann explained how a variety of sensory experiences, climbing, light rocking, gentle pressure, could benefit Evan. She suggested including a short rope ladder, a crash pad for safe jumping, and possibly an overhead canopy for shade. One Saturday, they gathered in the Pierce's backyard to take precise measurements. Evan, somewhat perplexed by the increased attention, hovered near Melanie. He occasionally asked for his missing swing, tears welling up at the memory. She promised him that a new, even better swing was coming soon. The volunteers made sure the final design respected property lines and had an aesthetic that might appease the HOA. They chose neutral or earthy colors for the main structure, planning to keep the bright items, like the new swing seat, somewhat hidden from street view by strategic angles. The idea was to defuse any argument about it being an eyesore, while also ensuring Evan still got the therapy equipment he needed. They faced one key question: how to fund the specialized swing seat. A few neighbors pitched in cash donations, not wanting Travis and Melanie to shoulder the cost alone. Tasha Lou set up a small crowdfunding page for the Evans Sensory Corner project, which, to everyone's surprise, raised enough to buy a top-tier therapy swing seat with harnesses, plus leftover funds for extra foam mats. By weekend's end, the plan was nearly complete. They would assemble the new structure in stages, pending official approval at the upcoming HOA meeting. Tension ran high. Everyone feared Karen might sabotage the vote with technicalities or fear-mongering. But the community's resolve to stand by Evan was equally strong. If she tries anything, Carlos said, we'll remind them she may have stolen the original seat. We won't mention her name outright without proof, but they know it's her. Melanie, humbled by the outpouring of support, found herself on the verge of tears multiple times. She realized how deeply people cared. In some strange way, Karen's cruelty had sparked a greater compassion, one that might give Evan a better therapy setup than they could have ever afforded alone. The monthly HOA meeting took place in the local community center. Normally, attendance was sparse, but this time the room was packed with neighbors eager to see whether the Pierce family's new project would be approved. Travis and Melanie sat near the front, armed with drawings and a letter from Mary Ann, the occupational therapist, supporting the plan's therapeutic benefits. Karen arrived early, taking her seat at the board's table with an air of cold authority. She wore a pale pink blazer, hair pinned up tight, and had a stack of printed documents about compliance standards. The atmosphere crackled with anticipation. President Barb Mitchell opened the meeting, running quickly through minor agenda items. Finally, she reached the main event. Item 6, Backyard Therapy Structure Proposal for the Pierce Family. She invited Travis and Melanie to present. Stepping forward, Travis explained their situation, how Evan's original therapy swing had vanished, how important a safe swing was for his autism therapy, and how the community rallied to build a comprehensive sensory zone. He held up a neat binder of plans, detailing the structure's dimensions, the neutral color scheme, and safety features, fenced access, secure anchor points, and so on. Melanie added that they had an occupational therapist's endorsement. A wave of supportive murmurs ran through the audience. Then Barb invited questions from the board. One member asked about potential noise. Travis explained that it was primarily for gentle sensory activities, no more noise than a typical backyard playset. Another board member inquired about insurance liability. Melanie had a prepared statement. Their homeowner's insurance would cover the structure, and it posed no greater risk than a standard swing set. Finally, Karen cleared her throat. I have grave concerns, she began. This is clearly a large, multi-feature installation that deviates from Hunter's Ridge uniformity. Have they even obtained official building permits? And do we really want to set a precedent for every homeowner who decides to erect elaborate contraptions? Our property values. Barb interrupted gently. Karen, we appreciate your concern, but we've confirmed the local ordinance doesn't require a permit for a structure under a certain size. The Pierce family's plan fits within that limit. And as for property values, many families are attracted to inclusive, supportive neighborhoods. This can be viewed positively. Karen pressed her lips thin, shuffling papers. But the guidelines clearly mention that any visible structure above fence height requires board approval. And that bright swing seat is definitely visible. Melanie replied softly, we'll choose a subdued color if necessary, or keep it behind the fence line. Our goal isn't to flaunt it. It's for therapy. A neighbor in the crowd spoke up, voice quivering with anger. Isn't it heartless to deny a child with autism the therapy he needs just because of appearances? A smattering of applause followed. Karen flushed. I'm not heartless. I'm defending our community standards. She gestured to her documents. If we let them build this now, next someone wants a giant trampoline or a greenhouse, and soon the neighborhood's aesthetics degrade. At that, Barb gave a subtle eye roll. We consider each request individually, Karen. We're not going to let the scenario spiral out of control. This is a unique situation with medical backing. Sensing the board's sympathy for the Pierces, Karen tried a final tactic. Well, I propose a delay. They should resubmit a more modest design that doesn't overshadow the yard or become an eyesore. But the other board members seemed unconvinced. They recognized the plan as well thought out and minimal disruption. A brief hush fell. Then Barb asked for a vote. The result was swift. The proposal passed with an overwhelming majority, Karen being the lone dissenting voice. Cheers erupted from the neighbors. Travis and Melanie exhaled in relief. The child's therapy corner would move forward. Karen sat rigid, face pale with anger, feeling her control slip away. The following weekend, a small army of volunteers descended on the Pierce's backyard with tools, lumber, paint, and determination. The air buzzed with the sound of saws cutting wood and hammers driving nails. The new A-frame for the swing took shape under the skilled hands of the amateur carpenter, while others measured out space for foam mats. Someone else installed a short climbing ramp, carefully sanding edges to prevent splinters. Evan watched wide-eyed from the patio, sometimes flapping his hands with excitement. Whenever the noise got too loud, Melanie guided him inside for quiet breaks, but he insisted on returning to see the progress. The neighbors laughed and chatted, a communal spirit reminiscent of an old-fashioned barn raising. They scrawled messages of encouragement on the underside of wooden beams, little notes Evan wouldn't see, but which they hoped would carry the project's positive energy. By day's end, the skeleton of the therapy corner was complete. A tall, sturdy archway formed the backbone for the new swing seat, a high-quality, harness design specifically made for children with sensory processing issues. Below lay foam tiles and plush floor mats in earthy colors, ensuring any slip would be cushioned. One side featured a climbing net, and the other had a chalkboard panel for creative doodling. They draped a small shade sail overhead, providing gentle lighting and shielding from direct sun. As the sun began to set, the volunteers tested the new swing. Travis clipped in the seat, double-checking the harness. Then, with Melanie's help, they coaxed Evan to try it. Initially hesitant at the unfamiliar seat, Evan soon relaxed as it cradled his body. A joyful grin spread across his face. He began to rock gently, then more vigorously, letting out small laughs that brightened everyone's spirits. Cheers and applause broke out. Melanie had tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered to the group. "We never imagined we'd have something so amazing for him." Karen's house stood just a few doors down. She peeked from behind a curtain, scowling at the celebratory scene. Instead of a small, ugly swing seat, the Pierces now had a full-blown therapy setup. She felt a mix of frustration and irrelevance. In trying to remove the problem, she had inspired something far bigger and more permanent. 2 nights later, a strange occurrence rattled the Pierces. Travis stepped out to take out the trash and found a familiar bright blue therapy seat propped against their fence gate. The padding was dusty, the harness straps slightly tangled, but it was unmistakably Evan's original swing, stolen weeks ago. No note, no explanation, only the seat itself. When Travis brought it inside, Melanie gasped. Where on earth did this come from? They realized that whomever had taken it had quietly returned it under cover of darkness. The seat was intact, if a little scuffed. Evan recognized it immediately, hugging it and bouncing with excitement. They suspected Karen had abandoned it, hoping to absolve herself quietly now that the new structure was complete. Without direct evidence, they chose not to raise accusations. The important part was that Evan's old swing had come home. They decided they could donate it to another family or keep it as a spare if needed. The new, sturdier seat was even better for Evan's needs, but there was sentimental value in the original. News of the seat's mysterious return spread among neighbors. Many guessed Karen was behind it, especially after her meltdown at the HOA meeting. But no one pressed the matter. The community's focus was on celebrating Evan's new therapy corner, which had become a symbol of unity. Rather than dwell on Karen's pettiness, they embraced the positivity of what had emerged. That weekend, The Pierces hosted a small backyard gathering to celebrate the completion of Evan's sensory zone. They invited the volunteers and neighbors who contributed to its design and construction. A simple buffet of snacks and lemonade greeted guests, while Evan proudly showed off each feature. The chalkboard panel, the climbing net, the foam mats for safe tumbling, and of course the brand new harness swing. Mary Ann, the occupational therapist, dropped by to see it in person, beaming at how well-designed everything was for sensory integration. Carlos Morales, who had spearheaded the volunteer effort, gave a short speech. Sometimes, adversity brings out the best in a community. We came together for Evan, but we also built something that reminds us how good neighbors can be. Let's keep that spirit alive. As applause rippled, a few sets of eyes drifted to Karen's house. She had not been invited, nor had she asked to attend. Her blinds remained drawn. People whispered that maybe she felt embarrassed. But no one let that spoil the day. The group toasted with lemonade, celebrating how a vicious act of theft spurred a flood of compassion. Afterwards, neighbors parted with warm hearts. Travis and Melanie tucked a sleepy Evan into bed, grateful that his meltdown that evening was minimal. He'd spent a good hour in the new swing, happily rocking to gentle music. The therapy zone was already working wonders. In the days that followed, Karen tried to carry on as usual. She patrolled the neighborhood with her clipboard, making notes about minor infractions. But residents were less tolerant of her nitpicks now. Someone who had apparently stolen a child's therapy seat had little moral authority to lecture them on lawn edging or mailbox decoration. The HOA, while not fully able to accuse Karen without evidence, had grown wary of her approach. Barb Mitchell considered calling for a re-election, suspecting Karen's seat on the board might not stand if neighbors forced a vote. Sensing the shift, Karen retreated from some of her duties, claiming health reasons. Her once feared presence became a mild annoyance that fewer people took seriously. Behind closed doors, Karen wrestled with her conscience. She maintained a stubborn belief she had done the right thing to remove an unapproved structure, yet a quiet shame gnawed at her. The outpouring of kindness from the neighborhood, contrasting with her own petty sabotage, highlighted her isolation. She found herself alone in her immaculate home, no one to confide in, no one praising her efforts to preserve property values. She had become the villain of the story. To avoid further backlash, she kept a low profile. Some suspected that eventually she might move away, or at least step down from the board. For the time being, though, she hovered on the periphery, haunted by a sense of defeat each time she passed the Pierce yard. Meanwhile, Evan's new therapy space became a cherished fixture of not just the Pierce backyard, but also the wider neighborhood. Occasionally, friends from school dropped by for playdates. Other parents with special needs children reached out, curious if they could replicate a similar setup. Travis and Melanie happily shared their blueprint and introduced them to Mary Ann, the occupational therapist, who offered guidance on building small-scale sensory equipment. The communal spirit kindled by the project spilled over into other initiatives. Residents began a community garden at the far end of the cul-de-sac, planting vegetables and herbs that neighbors could share. A sense of warmth and connection settled over Hunter's Ridge. People saw each other not as strangers behind identical picket fences, but as potential allies. This shift was particularly meaningful for the Pierces, who had once considered moving if the tension over the swing escalated. Now they felt deeply attached to the community that had rallied around their son. "I never knew we had so many kind souls here," Melanie often told Travis, reflecting on how a crisis brought out their neighbors' best selves. Evan's progress soared. Daily sessions in the swing or on the climbing net improved his coordination and emotional regulation. His meltdowns decreased noticeably, and he even began sleeping more soundly. Travis would sometimes sit with him at dusk, gently pushing the swing, amazed at how far they'd come from the heartbreak of that stolen seat. One evening, a few months later, the Pierces hosted a small dinner for the core group of neighbors who had helped build the therapy zone. Over grilled vegetables and iced tea, they reminisced about the drama with Karen. Laughter bubbled up as they recalled the intense HOA meeting. "If she never stole the seat," Carlos joked, "we might not have this entire fantastic setup." Melanie nodded. In a weird way, Karen's cruelty pushed everyone to unite for something even better. She hated to give credit to Karen, but it was undeniable that the fiasco had triggered a chain reaction of generosity. They raised glasses in a toast. To Evan's sensory corner. May it always remind us that compassion trumps pettiness. The group clinked cups, savoring the knowledge that they had turned an act of malice into a force for good. Across the street, Karen glimpsed the silhouettes of neighbors talking, their laughter drifting on the breeze. She felt a pang of envy. She, who prized neatness and order, had become an outcast in her own carefully groomed domain. The sensory corner thrived, a testament to community bonding, while she remained sidelined, consumed by regret she refused to admit. Still, in a rare moment of self-reflection, she found herself acknowledging that her theft had backfired spectacularly. Where once there was a single bright blue swing seat, there now stood an entire yard of therapy equipment, sanctioned by the HOA and embraced by the neighborhood. In trying to remove what she saw as an eyesore, she had inadvertently inspired something far more visible and permanent. Seasons turned in Hunter's Ridge. Summer gave way to crisp autumn days. Leaves piled on sidewalks, which neighbors swept together in communal raking sessions. The excitement over Evan's sensory corner never fully died down. Occasionally, passers-by would catch a glimpse of him happily swinging behind the fence, that new harness seat cradling him in rhythmic motion. The gentle squeak of the ropes had become a comforting sound in the Pierce backyard. Families from other neighborhoods came by, seeking ideas for their children's special needs. Travis and Melanie welcomed them, eager to share the blueprint and the sense of hope it had brought. Mary Ann, the occupational therapist, often cited the Pierce Project as an example of how communities could adapt to help children with sensory challenges. Hunter's Ridge was still governed by an HOA, of course, but the environment felt more open, more understanding. The board, led by Barb Mitchell, even discussed drafting clearer, friendlier guidelines around adaptive equipment, ensuring no other family would face trouble for installing something essential for special needs. Indeed, the wave of empathy had helped the subdivision evolve beyond rigid rule enforcement. As for Karen, she slipped further into isolation. Some said she was house hunting elsewhere, too proud to live where her power had waned. Others believed she might eventually soften, possibly returning the board seat to someone more community-focused. But her direct involvement in daily affairs diminished. The neighbors hardly missed her stern watchfulness. One brisk afternoon, Evan hopped onto his swing with renewed excitement, wearing a cozy jacket. Melanie helped clip him in, then stepped aside as he swayed. The autumn light filtered through the canopy, casting dappled shadows on the foam mats. Evan's eyes sparkled. This was no ordinary backyard structure. This was a place born of generosity, forged by compassion. Each gentle motion reminded his parents how neighbors, united against pettiness, could accomplish something profound. And so the story ended not in bitterness, but in a triumph for empathy over narrow-mindedness. A stolen therapy swing might have begun as a heartless act, but it culminated in a child's yard-sized haven, a tribute to the unstoppable kindness that sparks when good people stand up against cruelty. Evan soared, physically and metaphorically, proving that even in the face of a Karen's aggression, a community's shared humanity can transform a single, stolen object into a life-changing gift.